Do identities make us relate to food differently? Does sound help us construct our identity? In La Dolores, there are some people who are willing to help me answer these questions. The neighborhood of La Dolores is located in the south of Quito, the capital city of Ecuador. It is based on the periphery of the Chillo County, at the base of the mountainside and right where the city begins. This sector has been popularly described as the hole, since it was a place hard to access and with no basic services, such as sewage, electricity, roads, and transportation up until a couple of years ago. The mixture of urban and rural qualities is what makes this place special, and it is what attracts the locals to this place. Many people of the neighborhood come from rural upbringings, but they left the countryside to find a better life for themselves and their families in the city. Although scholarly discourse on the simple binary of urbanity versus rurality has been challenged, in the Ecuadorian imaginary, those categories seem to be meaningful. In fact, in Ecuador, rurality has been long connected to the countryside, isolation from big cities, lack of basic services such as sewage, electricity, and running water, and lack of opportunities for education and lack of diversity in career opportunities. In fact, the majority of career paths available for people in rural communities are mostly related to agriculture and livestock. On the other hand, urbanity is conceptualized in Ecuador as a highly interconnected place, not only to a national but also to an international level. Urban cities in Ecuador have more buildings, opportunities for education, and a high variety of careers.
Yo me crié allá pues en mi tierra y cómo le puedo decir, mi infancia no era tan buena, o sea, sabe que las personas del campo siempre somos como más abandonados, o sea, de la sociedad, porque el hecho que estamos en el campo, casi pocos nos toman en cuenta en el sentido, o sea, cómo le puedo decir, más que solamente nuestros padres, así hermanos, y ahí del resto nadie más. O sea, entonces yo crecí, como le digo, también con necesidades, porque ese tiempo, como le digo, en el campo, si uno no se siembra, ya mira cómo hacemos acá en el huerto, es la misma costumbre, o sea, como decir, la vida del campo. O sea, se siembra, se espera que crezca, produzca y, bueno, recoger los frutos, todo lo que uno se siembre, ¿no?
Es que como nosotros vivíamos en Chiriboga y en Chiriboga solamente había escuela. No había colegios. Como yo ya me separé de mi marido y la primer nieta ya acabó la escuela ya y la primaria ya iba al primer curso. De ahí como yo ya era separada de mi marido, de ahí mi hija dijo, mamita, usted vaya a Quito con mi hija al colegio. Y así fue, salí. Pero mi hijito que murió, él en cambio él se vivía aquí. Él trabajaba aquí, arrendaba cuarto, todo eso. Y solo yo y mis hijas vivíamos allá. De ahí con eso nos venimos y después ya los nietos ya siguieron ya acabando las escuelas, ya salir acá porque acá ya no había colegio. De ahí al último vuelta no nos enseñábamos pues aquí en Quito, enseñados en el campo, todo eso. Allá que teníamos leche, quesos, huevos. Vuelta aquí si tenemos plata comemos y si no hay nada, ni queso, ni huevo.
For many people who moved to the city, the opportunity to reconnect with some of the activities of the community garden has been rewarding and relaxing as they were able to connect with the land.
Eso, señorita, como parece que alguna vez conversamos, para mí tiene un encanto sin igual, porque sencillamente parece que no para todos va a ser lo mismo, Para mí, yo siempre he vivido en el campo desde pequeño, en el que vivo en el campo y ciudad, pues no. Digamos, a mí me ha encantado lo que son los deportes de todo tipo, o sea, deporte es como, digamos, jugarse fútbol, vóley, natación, pero también, como le contaba hace un rato, es parte del deporte ahora ya, eso de que nos gusta la caminata, es totalmente, digamos, aquí un campo ya en proceso de volverse, digamos, poblado, ¿no? Pero le digo que siempre aquí se escucha ese sonido natural del campo, no tanto como, digamos, que estuviéramos súper alejados, porque estando súper alejados tuviéramos otro tipo de animalitos, por ejemplo el zorrito, los conejos, y así, pero el resto que sí, digamos, como ustedes tienen tanto de las avecitas, cuando usted se pone a ver así las cosas más pequeñas y con tranquilidad, como usted cuando vea un arbolito, dice que el arbolito es como la casita de muchas especies pequeñitas, porque al arbolito suben los pajaritos porque ahí encuentran, sabe, gusanitos, de hormiguitas, encuentran arañitas, es la casa de un sinnúmero, esa es la naturaleza, sí, eso todavía se puede encontrar, todavía se puede ver aquí. Por eso es que ahí en la parte donde estamos haciendo el huerto, pues o sea, me gusta de que se conserve las cercas vivas, se llaman cercas vivas, o sea, de que sembrar arbolitos que no crezcan mucho, porque por ejemplo el eucalipto no, porque eso creo que no es bueno, una porque no es un árbol nativo y otra porque cuando está cerca de las cables de alta tensión eléctricas está prohibido también eso. Pero las que son nativas, eso es bonito, porque una que en cuanto a la agricultura, porque yo hice un curso de esto en Quito y aprendimos de que el viento también es un factor que así en forma abierta no favorece a las plantitas del huerto. Entonces hay que poner una especie de barreras, y estas cercas vivas son la barrera que se pone para que el viento no pase así abiertamente. Y ya le digo, y por eso de que se conserva la naturaleza, y si a usted le encanta eso, si a usted le gusta, digamos, ver así estas especies que crecen ahí como bien dice usted, los pajaritos y todas esas especies así, es bonito, eso es lo que quisiera que de alguna forma no se pierda.
Las condiciones de vida son diferentes a las del pueblo. A veces uno sí preferiría regresar al campo porque ahí hay mejores condiciones de vida, los productos son mejores, uno se puede ejercer otra clase de trabajo diferente a la de la ciudad. Bueno, acá es bastante silencio, bastante tranquilo. Lo que se puede apreciar es, por ejemplo, los sonidos de los pajaritos, diferentes clases de aves que hay todavía por acá. Y así el barrio es tranquilo, se respira un aire más limpio. Hay poca, lo que se dice, contaminación del smog con relación a la ciudad, más al fondo. Acá es más.
Y no me motiva porque dígase por las plantitas. A veces uno no se tiene, en veces una cebolla, una col, una selga, y se viene aquí, se cosecha, ya lo tengo para hacer una sopa, un poco de acelga, de col, una salada de col, de lechuga. Entonces eso es lo más hermoso que uno se tiene. Lo que Dios ha dado, lo que Dios ha hecho, la naturaleza, lo más lindo y lo más bello, y cómo nos vamos a agradecerle a Él. Y yo aquí, desde que yo me sentí a trabajar, porque también el trabajo es un ejercicio, ¿no? Un ejercicio, eso es bueno para la salud, lo que uno se suda, todo eso, y eso es lo más bueno para la salud, para tenerle sano, fuerte. Porque si paso en la casa sin hacer nada, mejor me voy a enfermar. Entonces, esto es como un ejercicio, dígase, coger el sadón, se mueve las manos, se camina. A mí siempre me ha gustado el campo es mucho mejor, es la cocina, estar por dentro, casi no me gusta, y también casi me sé bien cocinar, porque me gustó mucho el campo, y siempre en el campo he trabajado. Siempre me he ido a trabajar en plantaciones de flores, plantaciones de legumbres, porque por ejemplo, alguien me sabe decir, venga a la cocina, digo, no, porque yo no sé cómo cocinar. No sé, digo, a mí, invíteme al campo, digo, ahí sí voy, pero dígame, venga de empleada acá a la cocina, digo, eso.
Is there any connection between the community members' work in the land and their self-perceived rural identities? When I asked the neighbors individually with what type of lifestyle they identify the most, they all said that they identified more with the rural aspect of their lives since it was the most fulfilling to them. But how are these identities constructed? Although I know that there are many nuanced factors that affect our identities, I suggest that sound can be a determining factor as well. The combination of both place identity and soundscape theories could succinctly support this claim. Prushansky defines place identity as those dimensions of the self that define the individual's personal identity in relation to the physical environment by means of a complex pattern of conscious ideas, beliefs, preferences, feelings, values, goals, and behavioral tendencies and skills relevant to this environment. Place identity is subdivided in 3 categories in the words of Belange et al. First, we have cognitive place identity, which emerges as a result of the self-categorization processes of belonging to a group based on recognizable membership characteristics. This cognitive awareness is based on perceived similarities with other group members and dissimilarities with non-members. This component could be more related to the phenomenological conceptualization of identity as being and belonging and to its symbolic value. For instance, members of a community publicly express their allegiance to the group by emphasizing these observable attributes. The operationalization of cognitive place identity includes items such as, I identify with my place of residence. Second, we have affective place identity, which is the emotional attachment or affective commitment with a place and its social community. This component captivates the affective bond of individuals with their communities, which is manifested as feelings of attachment and belongingness to the place-related group. In this sense, the affective component of place identity would be close to the concept of place attachment widely used in the previous literature. Items such as I am emotionally attached to my place of residence are employed to measure affective place identity. And finally, we have evaluative place identity, which considers the significance of membership in terms of self-worth and related positive or negative connotations. In general, such an evaluation is positive and bolsters one's self-worth to the extent that this membership is a source of pride to the resident. In other words, the evaluative component includes residents' assessments of the settlement community as appealing or worthy of belonging to. Residents report their evaluative place identity with measures such as, I am proud of belonging to my place of residence. I suggest that such place identity concepts could also be applied through a sensorial lens that takes into consideration a member's relationship to the place where they live by considering their connection and conceptualizations of sound. These terms could be understood through soundscape analysis as follows. Cognitive place identity can be seen as the process on which sensorial inputs allow an individual's self-categorization, which is based on patterns of comparison based on previous associations of senses and places. Similarly to the environmental psychology definition, cognitive place identity could be related to phenomenological perceptions of identity. In other words, sensing and associating. For example, an individual's thought process could be, I know that in the countryside there are more animal sounds than traffic sounds. Therefore, if I live in a place where I sense similar characteristics, I can associate this place to what I know of the countryside. This suggests that part of one's identity could be informed by the sonic environment of a place. Regarding affective place identity, this could be defined in similar lines as the emotional attachment to a place through perceived pleasurable sensorial inputs and memory. This element considers the emotional reaction that sonic events can produce in an individual based on perceived notions or memories of a place. For example, an individual could think, the sounds of birds singing remind me of the happy memories that I experienced when I visited or lived in the countryside. Therefore, sonic elements could take part into a person's emotional attachment to a place based on the level of pleasure that such sonic event provoke in the individual or the pleasurable memories that such sonic events evoke. Finally, in terms of the evaluative place identity, it could be defined as the perceived, measurable, positive, and negative sensorial experiences that an individual perceives from a place. Similarly to the Belange et al.'s definition, it includes the assessment of an individual of the soundscape of a place as attractive or desirable to experience. At this point is where soundscape theories intersect with place identity. According to Damian et al., soundscapes provide social value in different ways. For the purpose of this video, I will focus on soundscape contributions to sense of place as an element that also contributes to perceived place identities. In addition, Williams and Stewart argue that sense of place could be defined as the accumulation of symbols, values, feelings, and meanings ascribed to a specific place. All this soundscape theory supports and complements in different levels the three types of identity place theories proposed earlier in the video. Furthermore, William and Stewart add that in fact sensory inputs such as sonic events do generate an emotional response to a specific location, which reinforces the notion of affective place identity. One of the most interesting concepts in soundscape theory is cultural soundscape. This term is conceptualized by Damian et al. As socially defined soundscapes that have cultural, historical, spiritual, or aesthetic values associated with them. These can be natural or human-dominated soundscapes. Generally, cultural soundscapes are those that tie people strongly to a place and that possess unique sound marks. It has been argued that identifying sound marks can help build community and preserve the natural and cultural heritage that makes locations unique. Sounds of wind through unique landscape features, the sounds emanating from historical battlefields during a reenactment, church bells that sound across a valley, folk horns produced along coastal areas, the sounds of a market in an urban area all represent soundscapes that may hold special cultural values for people. The greatest threats to cultural soundscapes are their homogenization due to anthrophony, which are sounds produced by human beings, and the loss of unique sound marks.
Lo que más se disfruta cuando, por ejemplo, casi cuando ya esté aquí la llavita, ya esté el momento de coger, ese mismo ratito le cocinamos y como dijo de la mata a la abuela, que es lo mismo el chu. Le coge este ratito, le cocina, le da ganas de comer hasta la dulce con un dulcecito, fresquito. Por ejemplo, si le cogen de un día para otro, ya no es lo mismo.
Yo, por ejemplo, cuando yo estoy ahí, yo casi lo más he pasado, por ejemplo, sola ahí en el huerto, porque no me gusta decirles, porque a las personas, los demás vecinos, voy a decir que no tienen tiempo, pasan ocupados, tienen que trabajar. Entonces yo a veces sí me doy el tiempito, entonces me voy y siento yo cuando estoy ahí, siento el sonido de las aves que cantan. Miro, ¿cómo le puedo decir? De las matas, escucho a veces ya cuando empieza a llover el sonido de las gotas y les veo, digo mejor, por ejemplo, mejor que llueva porque las plantas necesitan el agüita. Yo a veces no digo, no es que va a llover, yo no quisiera que llueva porque me voy a mojar, qué sé yo, no le pongo pretexto nada de eso, mejor yo me siento tranquila ahí y observo las plantas, por ejemplo ahorita las matitas de maíz que habían sembrado pues ya están grandes. El sonido de las hojas, se mueve el maíz, las cañitas, es bonito. Yo, por ejemplo, cuando yo llego ahí, miro las plantas, para mí es como le puedo decir, como estar en un lugar para desestresarme, no sé, pero siento eso.
Based on these theories and the shared testimony of members of the community, I argued that the space of the community garden can be considered as a unique sound mark within the neighborhood, a sound mark that informs their sense of place and contributes to building part of their self-perceived identity. In addition, members of the community have all mentioned that the community garden has become a space for them to reconnect or find a deeper connection with nature and back to their countryside upbringing. They have mentioned that the activities they conduct in the community garden helps them relax, soothe from the stressors of life, escape the pollution and monotony of their labor in the cities, and find a place of quietude. The community garden is, in fact, a cultural landmark, a space where community is created, a space where nature is taken care of and preserved, all done with the goal in mind of supporting one another, become at least a little independent from societal structures of oppression and discrimination that have maintained a large and racially informed gap between upper and lower economic classes. Moreover, the community garden is a space where individuals get to feel empowered in their fight to regain one of their basic human rights, which deals with food sovereignty and food security. During my conversations with the members of La Dolores, I was able to witness their true desire to connect with nature and produce their own sustenance through food. For all these reasons, I think that the community garden of La Dolores can be considered a cultural landmark worth of preservation and acknowledgement. This cultural landmark does contribute to the reinforcement of the identities of those who visit it and participate in the activities that involve its maintenance. And although soundscape is not the only nor the most important element in the construction of self-perceived notions of identity, it nonetheless plays a role in it. And it is worthy of considering and analyzing to amplify our notions of identity construction as scholars and members of a great variety of complex communities and societies. In this video, I argue that soundscape does contribute to identity building in terms of urban versus rural categorizations. Furthermore, I also argue that the members of the community who identify more strongly with a rural lifestyle or identity are those who participate the most in all activities that involve the community garden. Although I was not able to directly communicate with the members of the neighborhood who do not participate in the community garden due to me not being able to develop a closer relationship with them because of our less frequent encounters, one member of La Dolores, Enrique Salazar, thinks that those who do not come to work in the community garden may do so because they probably do not hold a lot of interest in the countryside lifestyle or with maintaining a connection to nature through agricultural work. He explains that in many cases, some people who left the countryside, just like he did, do so in order to find a better life and adopt the ways of the city.
Verá, ahí a la final comparto ciertas ideas porque dice, verá, entre las diferentes ocupaciones, digamos, que tenemos los seres humanos. Usted cuando compare un agricultor, digamos, ¿cómo se llaman esto? Un oficio y una profesión, hay diferencias que a la final le marcan porque la sociedad así creo que nos obliga. Digamos, si usted le pone ahí a un constructor y le pone al ingeniero, el ingeniero tiene, digamos, un nivel más elevado, claro, por su esfuerzo, su sacrificio. Pero si le pone al constructor o al agricultor ahí, pues parece que él no tiene la misma consideración, el mismo respeto. Entonces, por todas esas cosas, yo pienso que la juventud, ellos también, sí, nos hemos dado cuenta que todos somos capaces, de que todos podemos. Si a lo mejor algunos no llegaron a ser ingenieros, médicos, abogados, es porque su condición económica, no de ellos, sino que de sus padres, el haber nacido, digamos, en un hogar con poco dinero, eso ha hecho que ellos no lleguen a otros sitios. Y claro, ya hablar más adelante de políticas, cosas, no, porque esas cosas también ya saben que son como con compadres, pero por lo menos alcanzar, digamos, una profesión. Yo pienso que esa es la meta ahora de los hogares medios y también de los que estamos abajo, con esfuerzo y sacrificio. Sí se puede conseguir, y normalmente yo, digamos, por mí, no le obligaría, digamos, a mi hijo a que tiene que ser a lo mejor, digamos, agricultor, albañil. Yo quisiera que él también alcance alguna profesión, ¿no es cierto? Uh-huh. Eso es ir, nos sentimos así, que es ir mejorando, ir avanzando, y de hecho, el no conformarse, eso le ayuda a que como persona se vaya sintiendo mejor realizado, pues, alcanzar cosas que parecen, en los tiempos de antes parecían inalcanzables, pero ahora que hay la posibilidad de llegar a ocupar sitios mejores. Eso es en definitiva.
The last testimonials reflect the complexities that members of, I would argue, any capitalist society faces. The desire to reach a dignified life seems to be impacted by big systems of inequity that are heavily entangled with growth economic systems of production and westernized notions of development. I'd like to mention that the reality that many low-income households face is filled with nuances that involve all types of societal constructions that deal with race, gender, nationalism, ableism, access to basic public services such as health, education, and a large number of elements that impedes them to live under the same conditions of which many other privileged members of society do get to experience. However, some of the members of La Dolores have expressed to me their desire for their offspring to achieve a higher socioeconomic level based on an active participation of the current capitalist and neoliberal system that we all live in. And their desire is not only understandable, but completely valid and fair. However, as a scholar who is aware of the dangers and the impact of capitalism and neoliberalism, which I conceptualize as the manifestation of colonization, otherwise put, the manifestation of a world that continues to hold colonial values, colonial societal notions and structures of power, I cannot help but to desire to expand my knowledge about the importance of decoloniality in our everyday lives. I feel a strong desire to promote a dignified life through a decolonial lens, and from what I have been able to conceptualize in this moment and in my personal reality, this can come through promoting food sovereignty and by developing a stronger relationship to the land, not as a concept of a nation building, but as an aware relationship to all systems of life and sustenance. In my perspective, this is a shared reality, at least in countries of the global south where this kind of colonial oppression is more evident. Food sovereignty has become a way in which I can begin to decolonize my own notions of consumption and my relationship to nature. I understand food sovereignty in the same lines as it was stated in the first Global Forum of Food Sovereignty in Mali in 2007, which reads, "Food sovereignty is the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and the right to define their own food and agricultural systems in which everyone, including historically marginalized genders, play an important role." This system puts the aspirations and needs of those who produce, distribute, and consume food at the heart of food systems and policies, rather than the demands of markets and corporations. In addition, food sovereignty could be understood as one of many steps towards decoloniality, since decoloniality also questions the notion that land or nature's purpose is to fulfill a certain demand of resources, but instead it allows for different communities to develop their own worldviews and relationship to land and nature. In fact, Adolfo Levan conceptualizes decoloniality as the mechanisms that human groups implement as a strategy for questioning and making visible the practices of racialization, exclusion, and marginalization, procuring the redefining and re-signifying of life in conditions of dignity and self-determination, while at the same time confronting the biopolitic that controls, dominates, and commodifies subjects and nature. In conclusion, all of our interactions with the world involve to some degree sensorial perception, and for those with the ability to hear, sound becomes an element that plays a role in the construction of how they relate to the world and how they perceive themselves. In the case of the members of La Dolores who I talked to, soundscape does seem to influence their construction of identity in terms of urban and rural. Indeed, the work that they perform in the community garden also seems to be rewarded by a sonic environment that is only found from the garden's location. The community garden can be conceptualized as an important cultural sound mark in the neighborhood, and the neighbor's relationship to it not only informs us about their self-identifications, but also informs us about how they relate to nature and land. The final observation is important as it can guide future conversations around food sovereignty and decoloniality that could further improve the dignity and quality of life of many members of the community, as they will no longer heavily depend on and participate in an oppressive capitalist system, but could find autonomy and empowerment to find different ways to sustain themselves.